Months passed after that difficult conversation, but the underlying tension with my family never really dissipated. They still expressed their interest in the clinic, but it had taken on a different tone now. It wasn't just about offering help anymore, it was about their sense of entitlement. They seemed to feel that because I had built something from nothing, I owed them a piece of it. One evening, things reached a breaking point. My younger sister, who had been pestering me about helping with the clinic's social media again, showed up unannounced. She had brought along a special proposal for me, one that she thought would help the clinic. As she excitedly laid out her ideas, all I could think was how tired I was of these constant suggestions. "I'm just trying to help you grow the clinic," she said. "We could even feature the whole family in some posts, show the patients how family-oriented the clinic is. It's the perfect marketing tactic." The word stung. I could hear the undertones. She wasn't just offering advice anymore. She was pushing an agenda. A feeling of betrayal washed over me. I had worked hard to build something that was entirely mine, and now it felt like they were trying to turn it into some sort of family-run operation. "I told you already, I don't need your help with this," I snapped, the frustration boiling over. "I've built this from the ground up, and I'm not turning it into some family project just because you think it's a good idea. I'm not running a business for you to profit from without doing any of the work." Her face fell, and I immediately regretted raising my voice. She hadn't deserved that. But the resentment had been building for so long, and in that moment, it all came pouring out. She was silent for a long time before speaking again. "You're acting like you're the only one who's worked hard for this. We've always supported you, always been there. And now you're just shutting us out. Is that what family means to you?" Her words hit me like a punch in the gut. The guilt started to creep in. I knew they had supported me in their own way, but it wasn't the same as me putting everything I had into the clinic. The late nights, the endless paperwork, the sacrifices. Could I really deny them a part of it? I sat there, silent, torn between my loyalty to my family and my desire to protect the clinic I had built. In that moment, I realized just how complicated things had become. The days after that confrontation were filled with quiet tension. The clinic continued to run smoothly, but the atmosphere at home was far from peaceful. My family was hurt and so was I. I had spent so much time focused on my dream that I had neglected the feelings of the people who cared about me most. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that if I gave in, the very essence of what I had built would be lost. I needed to make a decision, one that would define the future of my clinic and my relationship with my family. Over the next week, I took time to reflect. I thought back to the moment I had opened the clinic's doors for the first time. The pride I felt, the joy of knowing I was doing something that mattered. But I also remembered the sacrifices my family had made for me, the way they had supported me even when they didn't fully understand my vision. I couldn't lose that. But I also couldn't allow them to take over something I had worked so hard to create. The key was finding a balance, a way to include them without letting them infringe on my autonomy. After much contemplation, I decided to speak to them again. This time I was prepared for the conversation. I needed to lay down clear boundaries, but I also needed to offer a compromise that would allow them to feel valued and involved without compromising the integrity of my clinic. When I sat down with my parents, I made sure to approach the conversation calmly, without the frustration that had marked our earlier exchanges. "Mom, Dad," I began, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's been happening. I realize I've been distant and I didn't mean to hurt you. But I also need you to understand that this clinic is my vision. It's not about keeping you out. It's about maintaining something that I've worked tirelessly for." They listened intently, and for the first time in weeks, the tension in the room seemed to lift. "I'm not asking for a complete takeover," I continued. "But I do need to find a way to involve you without sacrificing the clinic's core values. I think there's a way we can work together, but it has to be on my terms." Their faces softened as I spoke. My mother, always the peacemaker, was the first to respond. "We understand, and we're sorry for pushing you too hard," she said. "We just want to be there for you. But if this is your dream, we respect that. We just want to help in the ways we can." It was the breakthrough I had been hoping for. I suggested that they could contribute in more meaningful ways, like helping with patient outreach, organizing community events, or offering administrative support in the background. They wouldn't be involved in the day-to-day decision-making or management, but they could still play a role in the clinic's success. To my relief, they agreed. It wasn't the complete involvement they had envisioned, but it was a compromise that allowed us to work together without losing the integrity of what I had built. With the air cleared and a new understanding between us, I returned to focusing on the clinic. It wasn't long before I encountered new challenges: financial struggles, staffing issues, and competition from larger, more established clinics. But with the support of my family in the background, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. As time passed, I saw how the clinic's success began to reflect the balance I had created. My family was proud of what I had accomplished, and I knew that the love and support they had given me throughout my journey had helped shape the person I had become. But they also understood the importance of boundaries, and how those boundaries allowed the clinic to thrive. The journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every sacrifice. I had built a clinic from scratch, not just for myself, but for everyone who walked through those doors, patients and family alike. I had to act quickly. I couldn't let my family's image or reputation get in the way of saving those guests. I couldn't let anyone else eat that seafood. Not when I knew something was wrong. It didn't take long before the first signs of sickness became apparent. First, it was subtle. A guest would clutch their stomach, a look of discomfort spreading across their face. Then a few others followed suit. Someone nearby coughed violently, and a loud voice called for water. The air in the room began to shift, and what was once a cheerful celebration turned into an atmosphere filled with tension. I could feel it now, the panic setting in. The happy chatter of the guests had quieted, and some of them were beginning to look around, confused and concerned. My heart raced as I spotted a few more guests starting to sweat, their faces turning a strange shade of red. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the realization that nobody knew how to stop this. I had no proof that the seafood was poisoned, and even if it was, who could I turn to? The chef had already denied any problems, and with no clear signs of contamination, how could I convince anyone to stop the meal before it was too late? I felt my hands shake as I approached one of the waiters, a young man who had been serving drinks earlier in the evening. "Did you notice anything unusual with the seafood?" I asked in a low voice. He looked at me nervously. I don't know. Some of the guests have been asking for more water, but no one's complained about the food. Why? "I think the seafood is bad," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stop serving it. Now." His eyes darted nervously toward the kitchen. "But we can't just." "I'm not asking you to stop everything," I said, my voice hardening. "Just take the remaining seafood off the tables. Right now." I could see the internal struggle on his face, but after a moment, he nodded and hurried off to the kitchen. It wasn't enough, though. Not nearly enough. I needed to get to the heart of this before it spiraled further out of control. I couldn't just sit back and wait for someone else to figure it out. I had to know for sure if the seafood had been tampered with, if someone had deliberately poisoned the guests, or if it was just an accident. But who could I turn to for answers? The chef clearly wasn't going to help. And with the wedding in full swing, no one else seemed willing to listen. I decided to investigate on my own. First, I went back to the seafood station. The heat lamps had been switched off, but the smell was still there, faint but lingering. I examined the platters closely, running my fingers over the crustaceans. There was nothing visibly wrong, but then I remembered what I had seen earlier: the chef's nervous energy, the way he seemed distracted when I asked him about the food. As I moved around the station, something caught my eye: a small vial tucked away behind the stacks of seafood trays. Froze. My heart skipped a beat as I reached for it, pulling it out carefully. It was labeled in tiny print: "Toxin solution, use with caution." This was no accident. Someone had intentionally poisoned the seafood. My blood ran cold as I realized the gravity of the situation. If I didn't act fast, I could be the only one who stood between life and death for 200 innocent guests. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this go any further. There was no way I was going to stand by while my family and guests were unknowingly poisoned. This was my chance to take control, not just of the wedding, but of the danger that was silently creeping through the venue. I started by discreetly warning a few guests. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I needed to get the word out before it was too late. If you've eaten the seafood, you might want to get checked by the staff, I told one of the bridesmaids, who looked at me with concern. What's wrong? Is something wrong with the food? She asked. I don't know yet, but just stay on the safe side. I kept moving through the crowd, repeating the same message to anyone who had eaten the seafood. Slowly but surely word spread, and people began to realize the seriousness of the situation. The chaos started to unfold. Guests began to panic, some of them calling for help, others rushing to the bathroom. The air was thick with tension as the reality set in. The wedding was quickly spiraling into something unrecognizable. But my mind was clear. I wasn't going to let anyone else suffer because of this. I had to find the culprit. I had to expose them no matter the cost. The chaos in the hall escalated faster than I could manage. Guests were stumbling, holding their stomachs, and some even collapsed to the floor, their faces pale as they vomited violently. The once celebratory atmosphere had now turned to one of panic. The air was thick with confusion and fear. I was doing my best to keep calm, even though my mind was racing. Every instinct screamed that we needed to act fast. It was only a matter of time before the situation would spiral even further out of control. I moved through the guests, trying to help those who were in distress. But there was only so much I could do. I wasn't a doctor. I didn't have the training to handle a poisoning emergency. The only thing I could do was keep trying to warn as many people as possible and keep them away from the remaining food. I couldn't help but glance back at the seafood station, where the staff were still trying to clear the remaining platters from the tables. The chef was nowhere to be found, and that only deepened my suspicions. He had to know something about this. I found my mother, who was now visibly shaken, trying to console some of the guests. She looked at me with wide eyes, her voice frantic. I knew something was wrong. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She whispered, her face ashen. I tried to warn you, I replied quietly, grabbing her arm. It's not too late, but we need to get everyone to a hospital. We need to act fast. She nodded, her eyes filled with terror. I'll take care of the guests. You find the chef. I knew if I was going to get any answers, I had to find the chef. He had to be involved in some way, either directly or indirectly. The vial I found earlier was too much of a clue to ignore. But where was he? I started searching the hall, walking through the kitchen entrance, and pushing past staff who were rushing to manage the increasingly desperate situation. The venue was starting to feel like a pressure cooker, and I was the one who had to keep it from exploding. I headed to the back rooms, a maze of corridors that led to staff-only areas. There were several catering staff members huddled in one of the rooms, looking at the phones. When they saw me, their expressions immediately turned to fear. Where is the chef? I demanded. I need to talk to him now. One of the servers pointed toward the far corner of the room, where a door led to the private staff area. Without another word, I stormed over and pushed open the door, my heart pounding in my chest. There he was, the chef. His face was pale, and he was standing in front of a small table, fumbling with a cell phone, looking completely disoriented. I knew something was wrong with the seafood, I said, my voice shaking with fury. You poisoned them, didn't you?